English. The 7 shall agree together within 3 months to conquer the Apennine Alpes, but the tempest and coward Genoese shall sink them into sudden ruins. Not. There shall be 7 persons who shall be 3 months in making an agreement to go beyond the Apennines, but they shall be hindered by a tempest and by the cowardliness of the Genoese. English. The great theatre shall be raised up again, the dice being cast, and the nest spread, the first shall too much in glass. Beaten down by bows, who long before were split. Not. This must be put among insolubilia de aliaco. English. Crookback shall be chosen by the council, a more hideous monster I never saw upon earth. The flying blow shall put out one of his eyes, the traitor to the king shall be admitted as faithful. Not. This needs no explication. English. A child shall be born with 2 teeth in his mouth. It shall rain stones in Tuscany, a few years after there shall be neither wheat nor barley to feed those that shall faint for hunger. Not. Those 2 prodigies mentioned in the 2 first verses do presage a great famine that shall ensue a few years after. English. People that live about the Tar, Lot, and Garonne, take heed to go over the Apennine Mountains, your grave is near Rome and Ancona, the black frizzled hair shall dress a trophy of you. Not. The Tar, the Lot, and the Garonne are 3 rivers of Gascony, the inhabitants of which are forewarned not to go over the Apennine Mountains, or else they shall meet with their graves near Rome and Ancona. This hath relation to the 38th stanza, and to the interpretation thereof, therefore vide. English. When the beast familiar to mankind, after great labor and leaping shall come to speak, the lightning shall be so hurtful to a virgin, that she shall be taken from the earth, and suspended in the air. Not. It is a dog that shall come howling and leaping to his mistress's friends, because she was killed and suspended in the air by the lightning. English. The 5 strangers having come into the church, the blood shall profane the ground, it shall be a hard example to those of Thelaus, concerning one that came to break their laws. Not. I suppose these 5 strangers to be 5 commissioners, for the altering something in the government of Thelaus, who shall be all killed in a church, and the ground profaned by their blood, according to the Romish opinion. English. The heaven foretelleth concerning the city of Plancus, by famous clerks, and fixed stars, that the time of her sudden change is near hand, neither because of her goodness, or wickedness. Not. The city of Plancus is lion, because he was the founder of it. That city is threatened here of a sudden change, caused neither by her goodness or wickedness, but by a certain position and aspect of the fixed stars, which makes it fatal. English. The old monarch being expelled out of his kingdom, shall go into the east to get succors, for fear of the crosses he shall fold up his colours, he shall go into Mytilene by sea and land. Not. Mytilene is an island of the archipelago, belonging to the Turk. English. 700 prisoners shall be tied together, to murder half of them, the lot being cast, the next hope shall come quickly, and not so quickly, but 15 shall be dead before. Not. By the next hope, he meaneth the reprieve. The rest is clear. English. French kingdom thou shalt be much changed, the empire is translated in another place, thou shalt be put into other manners and laws, Rouen and Chartres shall do the worst they can to thee. Not. Rouen is the chief city of the province of Normandy, and Chartres the chief city of that of Beauce. English. The commonwealth of the great city, with great harshness shall not consent, that the king should go out being summoned by a trumpet, the latter shall be put to the wall, and the city repent. Not. It is hard to know what he meaneth by the great city wherein there is a commonwealth, whether it be Venice, Genoa, Geneva, Lucca, or some of the cities of Switzerland, but it seemeth that a king shall take shelter in it, who shall be summoned by a trumpet to come out, but the city will not suffer it, for which the said city shall be scaled, and repent. English. Paris conspireth to commit a great murder, Blois will cause it to come to pass, those of Orleans will set up their head again, Angers, Troyes, Langres will do them a mischief. Not. The prophecy contained in the two first verses came to pass in the time of Henry III, King of France, when the Parisians did rebel against him and made barricadoes in the streets, thinking to have taken him, who was compelled to run away for his life and fly to Chartres. This rebellion was raised and fomented by Henry of Lorraine, Duke of Guise, whom the king afterwards caused to be murdered, with his brother the Cardinal of Lorraine, at the convention of the three estates kept at Blois. Orleans, Angers, Troyes, Langres are remarkable cities in France. English. In Campania shall be so long a rain, and in Apulia so great a drought, the cock shall see the eagle with his wing disordered, and by the lion brought to extremity. Anat. Campania and Apulia are two provinces of the kingdom of Naples. The last two verses of the prophecy came to pass about the years 1630 and 1631. When Gustavus Adolphus, king of Switzerland, called here the lion, brought the empire, signified by the eagle, to extremity, the king of France signified by the cock, looking upon, and underhand assisting him. English. When the great one shall carry the prize, of Nuremberg, Augsburg, and Basel, by Agrippina the chief of Frankfurt shall be taken, they shall go through Flanders as far as France. Anat. Nuremberg, Augsburg, and Basel are cities of Germany. By Agrippine is understood the city of Cologne, called in Latine Colonia Agrippina, from the founderess of it Agrippina, mother of the Emperor Nero, or from M. Agrippa, favorite of Augustus Caesar. English. One of the greatest shall run away into Spain, that shall cause a wound to bleed long, leading armies over the high mountains, destroying all, and afterwards shall reign. Anat. This is so plain, that it needeth no interpretation. English. In the year that one I shall reign in France, the court shall be in a very hard trouble, the great one of Blois shall kill his friend, the kingdom shall be in an ill case, and double doubt. Anat. The meaning of the first verse is, when a king having but one eye shall reign in France. Blois is a city in France upon the river Loire. English. Montauban, Nimes, Avignon and Bessires, plague, lightning and hail at the end of March, the bridge of Paris, the wall of Lyon, and Montpellier, shall fall, from 607 3 parts. Anat. Montauban is a town in Gascony, Nimes and Bessires are towns in Languedoc, Avignon is a town in France belonging to the Pope, which shall suffer these damages by lightning at the end of March. English. 7 times you shall see the English to change, dyed in blood, in 290 year, not France, by the German support, Ares doubleth his Bastarnan pole. Anat. The two first verses concern England, the third France, the fourth marketh the time by the motion of the sign of Ares, which shall be favorable to France. We shall leave the two first verses to be interpreted by the English nation, which is most concerned in it, and come to the last two, which concern France. The third verse saith that France shall not change as England, by reason of the help it shall have from Germany, which hath been made good already for these 100 years, notwithstanding the wars between Henry II and the Spaniard, the conspiracy of the Protestant party against Francis II. At Amboise, the civil wars under Charles IX. The League under Henry III. And Henry IV. The Forain Wars under Louis XIII. And Louis XIV. Now reigning. The author's meaning by these words, but France not, is, you shall not see France change 7 times in 290 years, as the British nation, and then he giveth the reason of it, by German help, that is to say, that France shall have help from Germany. The fourth verse saith, that during those 290 years, Ares doubleth his Bastarnan pole. To understand this, we must suppose first that the sign of Ares ruleth over France, Palestine, Bastarnia, and secondly, we must learn from Ptolemy and other geographers, that Bastarnia containeth the people that are towards Sarmatia or Poland, which were called by the ancients, the people of Edmon, Sidane, Roxelane, and by others Pusans, from the island Puce, which is in Istria. Thirdly, we must suppose that the sign of Ares hath 2 poles, the first is that of the equinoctial line, and the second, that of the ecliptic, because the sign of Ares beginneth just in the line of the equator, and afterwards stretcheth towards the north. Now it is so that the place where its extension in depth in the ecliptical line of the sun is called by the author the Bastarnan pole. It is a pole sith in the constellations of heaven, we call poles, the two ends or extremities of them, and in the constellations of the zodiac, we call the first pole that which is next to the equator, and the second pole that which stretcheth towards the north, or towards the south in the ecliptical line. In this sense, the first pole of the sign of Aries is that which hath its first degree in the equator, the second is that which stretcheth towards the north in the ecliptic, and this last pole is called Bastarnan, because it is vertical to Bastarnia, as the astrologers set down their climates, kingdoms, provinces and towns under the 12 signs. Fourthly, we must suppose that this word to double may signify three things. 1. In seamen's terms, it signifieth to go beyond some place, as to double the Cape of Bona Speranza, which is called in Italian, tramonter, that is, to go beyond. 2. It signifieth to do twice the same thing, as Jacob did double his service for Rachel, and c. 3. In matter of travelling, it signifieth to go twice as far as is requisite. To double, in this place cannot be understood in the first sense, because the constellations never stretched out of their compasses, though the stars of which they are compounded have their peculiar motions. To understand this, we must know that the stars of the firmament have their peculiar motions from west to east, upon the pole of the ecliptic, and that they go that way a matter of 1 degree, in the space of about 100 years, and consequently the stars do retrograde every year in the ecliptic from west to east 52 seconds. Ptolemaeus holdeth this opinion, but other renowned astrologers give them more. For my part one am of Tycho Brahe's opinion, who allowed them 1 degree of retrogradation in 70 years and 7 months, and consequently 51 seconds every year. According to this doctrine the star that is in the horn of Aries was observed by Tamacharis in 2d degree, 150 years after, Hipparchus observed it in the first, 265 years after, Ptolemaeus saw it in the 6th degree, 740 years after, Albothognius observed it in the 18th degree, 304 years after, Alphonsus king of Spain found it in the 6th degree, 265 years after, Copernicus did observe it to be in the 27 degree and 2 minutes, 61 years after, Tycho Brahe saw it in the 27 degree, and above 37 minutes, so that in the space of 61 years it had gone 35 minutes. By this doctrine we see that the whole constellations do not go beyond their poles, though the stars that compound them change their poles every year of 51 seconds. To double, then here cannot be taken in the first sense, nor in the third sense. For the first reason, it must then be in the second sense, and thus Aries doubleth his Bastarnan pole, that is, Aries mocketh twice his pole, which answereth to Bastarnia. If you ask how it cometh to pass that Aries doubleth this pole, and in what place of heaven we set this Bastarnan pole, I answer to the first, that Aries doubleth his pole, when one of those 13 stars cometh to that point, which is a northern or western pole to that sign in the ecliptic. As to the second, I answer, that the place ought to be its last degree, viz. the end of the 30 degree. Why? Will you say, did the author mark that difference of the sign of Aries, rather than that of Taurus, or of another? I answer, that it was in favour of France, because Aries doth govern in France, and if it hath been favourable to it, when it came first to the Bastarnan pole, it will be so too when it doubleth the same pole, seeing that it will have the same position and aspect. Now we see, that in the space of these 100 years, France was not overcome, much less shall it be hereafter, seeing that the stars do promise its exaltation for a long continuance. If I were a great astrologer, I should observe exactly by this, that within the space of 290 years, Aries shall double his Cape Bastarnan, and consequently Aries should come to that pole just in the year 1845. Which is according to that we have said. English. Near the Rhine, out of the Noric mountains, shall be born a great one, though too late come, who shall defend the Polonians and Hungarians, so that it shall not be known what is become of him. Not. This is plain. English. A barbarian empire shall be usurped by a third person, who shall put to death the greatest part of his kindred, by death of old age. The fourth shall be stricken by him, for fear that blood should not die by blood. Not. The 2 first verses are plain, I acknowledge my ignorance in the last 2. English. Through all Asia shall be a great proscription, yea, in Mysia, Lydia, and Pamphylia, blood shall be spilled by the debauchness of a young black man, full of felony. Anat. Mysia, Lydia, and Pamphylia are countries of Asia. English. The great troop and sect, wearing a cross, shall rise up in Mesopotamia, near the next river shall be a light company, which shall hold that law for enemy. Anat. It is an army of Christians, be like Armenians, that shall rise in Mesopotamia, against whom shall an army of Turkish horsemen come, who did live by the next river. English. Near the Duera, close by the Cyrenian Sea, shall come to pierce the great Pyrenean mountains, the shorter hand and his pierced gloss, shall in Carcassonne lead his plot. Anat. The Cyrenian Sea is that sea which is by the province of Cyrene. The Pyrenean mountains part Spain from France. Carcassonne is a town in France near unto Spain. The rest passeth my understanding. English. The Roman power shall be quite put down, his great neighbor shall follow his steps, secret and civil hatreds and quarrels shall stop the buffon's folly. Anat. The first verse signifieth that the Pope's authority shall be put down. The second, that his great neighbor, that is the empire, shall follow his steps, that is, be put down too. The two last verses are plain. English. The head of Persia shall fill a great alchade, a fleet of galleys against the Mahometan nation, from Parthia and Media they shall come to plunder the Cyclades, a long rest shall be on the Jonique port. Anat. I could not find what he meaneth by alchade. The second verse is plain. Parthia and Media are two kingdoms depending from that of Persia. The islands of Cyclades are in the Aegean Sea, and are so called because they are like a garment about the city of Delos, for Kappa-upsilon Kappa-lambda alpha in Greek signifieth a round garment of a woman. The Jonique Sea is that sea in Grecia, which is about Athens and Corinth, and see English. When the sepulchre of the great Roman shall be found, the next day after a pope shall be elected, who shall not be much approved by the Senate, poisoned, his blood in the sacred sieve. Anat. This seemeth to foretell the finding out of the sepulchre of some famous Roman, and that the next day after a pope shall be elected, who being not well approved of by the conclave, shall be poisoned in the chalice, which is the communion cup that the Roman Catholics use at Mass, signified here by the Latine word siphus. English. The great bailiff of Orleans shall be put to death, by one of a revengeful blood, he shall not die of a deserved death, nor by chance, but the disease of being tied hand and foot hath made him prisoner. Anat. The bailiff of Orleans is a great officer, for he is their lord, chief justice, and of all the precincts. It seemeth that this man shall be put to death, by one of a revengeful blood, not that he had deserved it, or come to it by chance, but because he shall be tied hand and foot, and die in prison. English. A new sect of philosophers shall rise, despising death, gold, honors and riches, they shall be near the mountains of Germany, they shall have abundance of others to support and follow them. Anat. This is properly said of the Anabaptists in Germany, in the time of John de Leyden, and now of the Quakers in England, and elsewhere. English. A people of Spain and Italy without a head shall die, being overcome in the Chersonese, their saying shall be betrayed by a light folly, the blood shall swim all over at random. Anat. Chersonese is a land or ground unmanured, the rest is plain. English. A great army led by a young man shall yield itself in the hands of the enemies, but the old man born at the sign of the half-hog shall cause Chalon and Mascon to be friends. Anat. The two first verses are plain, as for the third verse, I could not find who that old man should be, that shall be born at the sign of the half-hog. Chalon and Mascon are two cities in France, the first in Champagne, the last in Burgundy. English. Great Brittany comprehended in England, shall suffer so great an inundation by waters, the new League of Ausoin shall make wars, so that they shall stand against them. Anat. This prophecy is divided in two parts. The first two verses foretell a great inundation that was to happen in England. The last two speak of a league and insurrection that shall be at Bordeaux, which is here called Ausone, from a famous Latine poet named Ausonius, who was born in that city. As to the first part, after much seeking and inquiry, I found the truth of it in a Latine book, called Rerum in Gallia, Belgia, Hispania, Anglia, and C. Gestarum anno 1607. Tommi septimi liber secundus conscriptus a Nicolau Gotardo artis Dantiscano, where the history is related thus. About the end of January 1607 the sea broke out so violently in England that after the breaking of fences and dikes, it caused very great damages to the inhabitants. The greatest mischief was done in Somersetshire, where the water did overflow 10 leagues in length, and 2 in breadth, 12 foot high in the most eminent places. This sudden inundation brought a fearful alarm to the Countray people. Some of them, going to their plough, were fain to run back to their houses, where they found their enemies at their doors, viz. Death and water, who without distinction swept them away. In a little time, the towns appeared like islands, encompassed on all sides, and presently after were swallowed up, so that the tops of the trees were scarce seen. This new flood covered so the towns of Hansfield, in the same county, those of Grantham, Kenhes, Kingston, and Bryan-Don, with several farms built in the Champion Countray, that none of the buildings could be seen. If you add to this the devastation of the places, the quantity of corn, fruit, and grass that was lost, the misery shall be so great as not to be expressed. During this fearful quarrel between the water and the land, an exceeding great number of people died of all ages and sexes. It would avail them nothing to get into the upper stories and roofs of houses, nor upon the highest trees, for the imperious waters did so swell and rage, that the foundations of the houses and roots of the trees were loosened, so that both fell to the ground, or rather into the water. The people, seeing no way to escape, resolved to die patiently. No body could without great grief see the oxen and sheep drowning, for there was such a numerous quantity of them, that afar off one would have thought them to be rocks in the sea, but seeing them swimming, and hearing them bleating and bellowing, one would have thought them to be a storm and hissing of winds. A rich farmer, and father of 7 children, being involved in the flood, and much astonished at this accident, nevertheless thinking the danger less than it was, went about to save some of his best goods, but seeing the waters to increase, he forsook all, and went to save one of his children, whom he loved best, but the waters followed him so close, that all he could do, was to get upon the roof of his house. Among the children there was a little one sleeping in a cradle, which being made of close boards, did swim upon the waters about 3 miles, and was taken up alive and sound. The haycocks did swim like ships upon the waves, the pigeons and pigs were upon the sheaves that the water carried away. The connies, being driven out of their holes, had leapt upon the backs of the swimming sheep. A certain shepherd, being about to gather his sheep into their fold, was followed by the flood, ran for his life, and climbed upon a high tree, where seeing his sheep bleeding in the water, he began to tear his hair, to smite his breast, to lift up his hands and his eyes to heaven, and when his sheep had all perished, and himself endured an extreme cold and hunger, he was at last taken up in a boat that was sent to save the distressed. But here we must talk of Bristol, which is one of the chiefest cities in England, by reason of the haven, which bringeth thither abundance of merchants from several nations. The same day of that inundation, the sea breaking into a great channel, did presently overflow the Countray with such quickness and violence, that it covered the valleys and the smaller hills, insomuch that nothing but an utter ruin was expected. Many whole houses were turned upside down, and carried away with the flood. The barns full of corn, hay, and straw were overthrown, and the cattle carried away, besides abundance of people of all sorts. The merchants of London and Bristol, and the rest of the inhabitants, besides the loss of provisions, suffered an inestimable one in their commodities, which they had provided for the fair, that was then near hand, the most part of them being carried away by the flood, and the rest so spoiled, that the owners could not tell what to do with them. A gentleman dwelling between Barnstable and Bristol, and 2 leagues off from the sea, being gone abroad in the morning to oversee his grounds, did look towards the sea, ran back again to his house, to bring the sad news to his wife and servants. While they were endeavouring to pack up the most precious of their goods, the water came about the house so fast, that they altered their resolution, and bethought themselves only to save their lives. The servants busied themselves about tying the goods together, thinking the water could not have carried them away. As for the gentleman, he went with his wife and children to the top of the house, and got upon the rafters of the roof. Although nothing appeared to them but the image of death, nevertheless some hope and desire of escaping made the gentleman come down to save a little trunk, wherein his papers of greatest concernment were. Being come down from the rafter, he laid hold of the trunk, and fastened it to a manger. While he was bussy about it, the waves of the sea did so beat against that house, that it fell down to the ground. The wife, children, and servants were swallowed up in the ruin. The gentleman laid hold on a rafter, and was carried away with it above half a league further, to a mountain, where he set his foot upon dry ground, being half dead with fear and grief, and bewailing the loss of his wife, children, and servants. He spied the little trunk in the manger, which he drew to land, and that was all he saved, besides his life. Another gentleman living thereabouts, and newly married, was resolved that day to go to the next town, and make merry with some friends, whereupon he bid his men make his horse ready, and himself went to put on his boots. After he had put on one, and whilst he held the other in his hand, the waters came so fiercely into that house, that they compelled the half-booted gentleman to run away for his life, in an upper chamber, but he was followed so close by that merciless element, that he was fain to get upon the top of the roof, to save his life, and to ride upon the upper rafter, but the house and roof melting by the violence of the waves, this new knight was carried by the violence of them towards the town where he intended to make merry, and there was saved with much ado. It happened at the same time near Marcan, in the Duchy of Norfolk, that two thieves, going about to steal some cattle, while they were driving of them, perceived in the morning the justice of God following them. It was the water, which having overtopped the dikes, threatened the takers of being taken, and compelled them to save themselves with all speed. From their wickedness did arise a great good, for to the next town they went, and bid the sexton to ring the bell, and to cry water, water. The inhabitants being for the most part asleep, did not know what to do in such an alarm. Some climbed into the church's steeple, others thinking there were thieves went about to fence and defend their houses, others hearing of a flood, laughed at it, and said, that those who brought this news deserved to be punished, but presently they altered their languages, and their laughing was turned into a fearful mourning, every one flying to save himself, his wife, and children, and whatsoever they could pack up of their most precious goods. Some thinking to have more wit than others, went about to divert the current of the water from their houses, but seeing there was no remedy, they went with their wives and children to the tops of their houses, in a lamentable fright. But when the water came to seize upon the houses, wherein there were some playing, some drinking, others already drunken, a great part of them were drowned, others ran to a hill near the town, where they spent the rest of that night, and the day following with great lamentations. The next day they saw their houses half under water, and many people, who from the windows and steeples cried for help, others endeavored to save themselves upon boards and rafters. The horses tied to the manger were all suffocated. The cattle in the fields were by this time driven to the mount called True Hill, and for all that, were not out of danger, for the mountain was encompassed with water to such a height and depth, that without boats there was no access to it, chiefly because of the thickets and bushes. Thus so much cattle was about to perish, had not some shepherds brought boats loaded with provisions for men and beasts, till the waters retired again, and the dikes were made good.